Chapter 16. The very end of the world. Reepicheep was the only person on board besides Drurian and the two Benencids who had noticed the sea people. He had dived in at once when he saw the Sea King shaking his spear, for he regarded this as a sort of threat or challenge and wanted to have the matter out there and then. The excitement of discovering that the water was not fresh had distracted his attention, and before he remembered the sea people again, Lucy and Drurian had taken him aside and warned him not to mention what he had seen. As things turned out, they need hardly have bothered, for by the time the Dawn Treader was gliding over the part of the sea which seemed to be uninhabited, no one except Lucy saw anything more of the people, and even she had only seen one short glimpse. All morning on the following day, they sailed in fairly shallow water, and the bottom was weedy. Just before midday, Lucy saw a large shoal of fishes gathering on the weed. They were all eating steadily and all moving on in the same direction, just like a flock of sheep, thought Lucy. Suddenly, she saw a little sea girl of about her own age in the middle of them, a quiet, lonely-looking girl with a sort of crook in her hand. Lucy felt sure that this girl must be a shepherdess, or perhaps a fish herdess, and that the shoal was really a flock or pasture. Both the fishes and the girl were quite close to the surface, and just as the girl gliding in the shallow water and Lucy leaning over the bulwark came opposite to one another, and the girl looked up and stared straight into Lucy's face. Neither could speak to the other, and the moment the sea girl dropped astern, but Lucy will never forget her face. It did not look frightened or angry like those of the other sea people. Lucy had liked that girl, and she felt certain the girl had liked her. In that one moment, they had somehow become friends. There does not seem to be much chance of their meeting again in this world or any other, but if ever they do, they will rush together with their hands held out. After that, for many days, without a word in her shrouds or from her bows across the waveless seas, the Dawn Treader glided smoothly east. Every day and every hour, the light became more brilliant, and still they could bear it. No one ate or slept, and no one wanted to. But they drew buckets of water, drawing dazzling water from the sea, stronger than wine and somehow wetter, more liquid than ordinary water, and pledged one another silently in deep draughts of it. And one or two of the sailors who had been oldish men when the voyage had begun now grew younger every day. Everyone on board was filled with joy and excitement, but not an excitement that made one talk. The further they sailed, the less they spoke, and then, almost in a whisper, the stillness of that last sea had held on them. "My lord," said Caspian to Drurian one day, "what do you see ahead?" "Sire," said Drurian, "I see whiteness all along the horizon from north to south as far as we can reach." "That is what I see too," said Caspian, "and I cannot imagine what it is." "If we were higher latitudes, Majesty," Drurian said, "I would say it was ice, but it can't be that, not here. All the same, we'd better get men to the oars and hold this ship back against the current. Whatever the stuff is, we don't want to crash into it at this speed." They did as Drurian said, and so continued to go slower and slower. The whiteness did not get any less mysterious as they approached it. If it was land, it must be a very strange land, for it seemed just as smooth as the water and the same level with it. When they got very close to it, Drurian put the helm hand over and turned the Dawn Treader so that she was broadside to the current and rowed a little ways southward along the edge of the whiteness. In so doing, they accidentally made that important discovery that the current was only about 40 feet wide and the rest of the sea was so still as a pond. This was good news for the crew, who had already begun to think of their return journey to Ramadu's land. Rowing against the stream all the way would be a very poor sport. It also explained why the shepherd girl had dropped so quickly astern. She was not in the current. If she had been, she would have been moving east at the same speed as the ship. And still no one could make out what the white stuff was. Then the boat was lowered and it put off to investigate. Those who remained on the Dawn Treader could see that the boat pushed right in amidst the whiteness. They could hear the voices of the party and the boat clear across the still waters, talking in shrill and surprised ways. Then there was a pause while Reneth in the bows of the boat took a sounding. And when after that the boat came up rowing back, there seemed to be plenty of white stuff inside her. Everyone crowded to the side to hear the news. Lilies, said Manny. Your Majesty, said Reneth, standing up on the bow. What did you say? Said Caspian. Blooming lilies, Your Majesty, said Reneth. Same as in a pond or in a garden at home. Look, said Lucy. It was who was in the stern of the boat. She held up her wet arms full of white petals that had flat leaves. What's the depth, Reneth? Asked Drurian. It's the funniest thing, Captain, said Reneth. It's still deep. There are 3.5 fathoms. There can't be real lilies, and not what we call lilies, said Eustace. Probably they were not, but they were very like them. And when, after some consultation, the Dawn Treader turned back into the current and began to glide eastward through the Lily Lake or the Silver Sea. They tried both of these names, but it was the Silver Sea that stuck. And as now on Caspian's map, the strangest part of their travels began. Very soon, the open sea which they were leaving was only a rim of blue on the western horizon, whereas about whiteness shot with faintest color of gold spread around them on every side, except just astern, where their passage had thrust the lilies apart and left an open lane of waters shone like dark green glass. To look at it, this last sea was very like the Arctic, and if their eyes had not grown so strong as eagles, the sun on all that whiteness, especially with early morning and the sun was hugest, would have been unbearable. And every evening, the same whiteness made the daylight last longer. There seemed no end to the lilies. Day after day, from all those miles and leagues of flowers there were that rose to a smell which Lucy found very hard to describe. Sweet, yes, but not at all sleepy or overpowering. A fresh, wild, lovely, lonely smell that seemed to only get into your brain and make you feel that you could go up mountains or a run or wrestle with an elephant. She and Caspian said to one another, I feel that I can't stand much more of this, yet I don't want it to stop. They took soundings very often, but it was only several days later that the water became shallower. After that, it went on getting shallower. There came a day when they had to row out of a current and feel their way forward at a snail's pace, rowing. And soon it was clear that the Dawn Treader could sail no farther east. Indeed, it was only the very clever handling of that saved her from grounding. Lower the boat, said Caspian, and then call the men aft. I must speak to them. What's it going to do? Whispered Eustace to Edmund. There's a queer look in his eyes. I think we probably all look the same, said Edmund. They joined Caspian on the poop, and soon all of them were crowded around at the foot of the ladder to hear the king's speech. Friends, said Caspian, we now have fulfilled the quest on which you embarked. The 7 lords are all accounted for, and as Sir Rupachip has sworn never to return, when you reach Romadu's land, you will doubtless find the lords Revelin and Argive and Montaron awake. To you, my Lord Drurian, I entrust this ship, bidding you sail to Narnia with all speed you may, and above all, not to land on the island of Deathwater, and instruct my regret the dwarf Trumpkin to give. Sorry, one more time. And instruct my regent, the dwarf Trumpkin, to give to all these, my shipmates, the rewards I promised them. They have been earned well. And if I come not again, it is my will that the regent and Master Cornelius and Truffle Hunter, the Badger, and the Lord Drurian choose a king of Narnia with the consent. But sire, said Drurian, interrupting, are you advocating? A low murmur of dismay ran through the sailors. We will take a boat, said Caspian. You will have no need of it in these gentle seas, and you must build a new one on Ramadu's island. And now, Caspian, said Edmund suddenly and sternly, you can't do this. Well, certainly, said Reepicheep, His Majesty cannot. No, indeed, said Drurian. Can't I? Said Caspian sharply, looking for the moment not unlike his uncle Mirat. Begging your Majesty's pardon, said Brunef from the deck below, but if one of us did the same, he would be called deserting. You presume too much on your long service, Renef, said Caspian. No, sire, he's perfectly right, said Drurian. By the mane of Aslan, said Caspian, I had thought you were all my subjects here, not my schoolmasters. I'm not, said Edmund. And I say, you cannot do this. Can't again, said Caspian. What do you mean? If it please your Majesty, we mean shall not, said Reepicheep with a very low bow. You are the king of Narnia. You break faith with all your subjects, and especially with Trumpkin, if you do not return. You shall not please yourself with adventures as if you were a private person, and if your Majesty will not hear reason, it will be the truest loyalty of every man on board to follow me in disarming and binding you until you come to your senses. Quite right, said Edmund, like they did with Ulysses when he wanted to go near the sirens. That's in the Iliad and the Odyssey, in case you want to know. Caspian's hand had gone to his sword hilt when Lucy said, and you've almost promised Ramadu's daughter to go back. Caspian paused. Well, yes, there's that, he said, and he stood irresolute for a moment and then shouted out to the ship in general. Caspian paused. Well, have it your way. The quest is ended. We all return. Get the boat up again. Sire, said Reepicheep, we do not all return. As I explained before, silence, thundered Caspian. I've been lessoned, but I'll not be baited. Will no one silence that mouse? Your Majesty promised, said Reepicheep, to be good, Lord, to the talking beasts of Narnia. Talking beasts, yes, said Caspian. I said nothing about beasts that never stop talking. And he flung down the ladder in a temper and went into the cabin, slamming the door. But when the others rejoined him a little while later, they found him changed. He was white, and there were tears in his eyes. It's no good, he said. I might as well have behaved decently for all the good I did with my temper and swagger. Aslan has spoken to me of... No, I don't mean he was actually here. He wouldn't fit in that cabin, for one thing, but the gold lion's head on the wall came to life and spoke to me. It was terrible, his eyes. Not that he was at all rough with me, only a bit stern at first, but he was terrible all the same. And he said, oh, I can't bear it. The worst thing that he could have said, you've to go on. Reep and Edmund and Lucy and Eustace and I am going back alone and at once. And what is the good of anything? Caspian, dear, said Lucy, you knew we'd have to go back to our own world sooner or later. Yes, said Caspian with a sob, but this is sooner. You'll feel better when you get back to Ramadu's Island, said Lucy. He cheered up a little later on, but it was a grievous parting on both sides, and I will not dwell on it. About 2:00 in the afternoon, well victualed and watered, though they thought they would need neither food nor drink, and with Reepicheep's coracle on board, the boat put away from the Dawn Treader, so as to row through the endless carpet of lilies. The Dawn Treader flew all her flags and hung out her shields to honor their departure. Tall and big and homelike, she looked from their low position with all the lilies around them, and even before she was out of sight, they saw her turn and begin rowing slowly westward. Yet though Lucy shed a few tears, she could not feel as much as you might have expected. The light and the silence, the tingling smell of the silver sea, even in some odd way, the loneliness itself were too exciting. There was no need to row, for this current drifted as steadily to the east. None of them slept or ate. All that night and all the next day they glided eastward, and when the third day dawned, with a brightness you or I could not bear, even if we had dark glasses on, they saw a wonder ahead. It was as if a wall stood between them and the sky, a greenish gray, trembling, shimmering wall. Then up came the sun, and at its first rising, they saw it through the wall, and turned into wonderfully rainbow colors. Then they knew the wall was really a long, tall vine, a wave endlessly fixed in one place. As you may often have seen at the edge of a waterfall, it seemed to be about 30 feet high, and the current was gliding them swiftly toward it. All right. Come on, cat. There we go. Now, you might have supposed they would have thought they were in danger. They didn't. I don't think anyone could have in their position. For now, they saw something not only behind the wave, but behind the sun. They could not have seen even the sun if their eyes had not been strengthened by the water of the last sea, but now they could look at the rising sun and see it clearly as we see things beyond it. And what they saw eastward beyond the sun was a range of mountains. It was so high that either they never saw the top of it or they forgot it. None of them remembers seeing any sky in the distance in that direction. And the mountains must really have been outside of the world, for any mountains, even a quarter of the 20th of the 20th of the height, ought to have been covered with ice and snow on them. But these warm and green and filled with forests and waterfalls, however high you looked. And suddenly there came a breeze from the east, tossing the top of the wave into foamy shapes and ruffling the smooth water all around them. It lasted only a second or so, but it brought them was in that second, none of those three children will ever forget. It brought a smell and a sound, a musical sound. Edmund and Eustace would never talk about it afterwards. Lucy could only say, "It would break your heart." "Why," said I, "was it so sad?" "Sad? No," said Lucy, "not sad." No one in that boat doubted that they were seeing beyond the end of the world into Aslan's country. At that moment, with a crunch, the boat ran aground. The water was too shallow now for it. "This," said Reepicheep, "is where I go on alone." They did not even try to stay him, for everything now felt as if it had been fated or had happened before. They helped him to lower his little coracle. Then he took off for his sword. "I shall need this no more," he said, and flung it far away across the lilied sea. Where it fell, it stood upright, with its hilt above the surface, and then he bade them goodbye, trying to be sad for their sakes, but he was quivering with happiness. Lucy, for the first and last time, did what she had always wanted to do, taking him in her arms and caressing him. Then hastily he got into his coracle and took a paddle, and the current caught it, and away he went, very black against the lilies. But the lilies grew on in a wave. It was smooth, like a smooth green slope. The coracle went more and more quickly, and beautifully it rushed up the wave's side. For one split second, they saw the shape of Reepicheep on the very top. Then it vanished, and since that moment, no one can truly claim to have seen Reepicheep the mouse. But my belief is that he came safely to Aslan's country and is alive there to this very day. As the sun rose, the sight of those monuments outside the world faded. The wave remained, but there was only blue sky behind it. The children got out of the boat and waded, not toward the wave, but southward with the wall of water on their left. They could not have told you why they did this. It was their fate. And through all they had felt, it had been very grown up on the Dawn Treader. They now just felt the opposite and held hands as they walked through the lilies. They never felt tired. The water was warm and all the time getting shallower. At last, they were on dry land and then on grass. A huge, plain, very fine, short grass, almost level with the silver sea and spreading in every direction without so much as a molehill. And of course, as it always does in a perfectly flat place without trees, it looked as if the sky came down to meet the grass in front of them. But as they went on, they got the strangest impression that here at last the sky really did come down and join the earth. A blue wall, very bright, but real and solid, more like glass than anything else. And soon they were quite sure of it. It was very near now. But between them, at the foot of the sky, there was something so white on the green grass that even with their eagle's eyes, they could not hardly look at it. They came out and saw it was a lamb. You might remember in the Bible, Jesus is called both a lion and a lamb. I wonder if that's why. Come and have breakfast, said the lamb in its sweetest milky voice. Then they noticed for the first time that there was a fire lit on the grass and fish roasting on it, and they sat down and ate the fish, hungry now for the first time in many days, and it was the most delicious food they had ever tasted. At the very end of the book of John, there's a story about Peter having a breakfast like that. Please, lamb, said Lucy, is this the way to Aslan's country? Not for you, said the lamb. For you, the door to Aslan's country is from your own world. What, said Edmund? Is there a way to Aslan's country from our world too? There is a way into my country from all the worlds, said the lamb. But as he spoke, his snowy white flushed into a tawny gold, and his size changed, and he was Aslan himself, towering above them and scattering light from his mane. Aslan, said Lucy, will you tell us how to get to your country from our world? I shall be telling you all the time, said Aslan, but I will not tell you how long or short the way will be. Only that it lies across a river, but do not fear, for I am the great bridge builder. And now come, I will open the door in the sky and send you back to your own land. Please, Aslan, said Lucy, before we go, will you tell us when we can come back to Narnia again? Please, and oh, do make it soon. Dearest, said Aslan very gently, you and your brother will never come back to Narnia. Oh, Aslan, said Edmund and Lucy both together with despairing voices. You're too old, children, said Aslan, and you must begin to choose your own world now. It isn't Narnia, you know, sobbed Lucy. It's you. We shan't meet you there. And how can we live never meeting you? But you shall meet me, dear, said Aslan. Are you there too, sir? Said Edmund. I am, said Aslan. But there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. This was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. And Eustace. Is Eustace never to come back either? Said Lucy. Child, said Aslan. Do you really need to know that? Come, I am opening the door to the sky. Then all in one moment, it was a reddening of the blue wall, like a curtain being torn, and a terrible white light from beyond the sky, and the feel of Aslan's mane, and a lion's kiss on their foreheads, and then the back bedroom in Aunt Alberta's home at Cambridge. Only two more things need to be told. One is that Caspian and his men all came safely back to Ramadu's island, and the three lords woke from their very deep sleep. Caspian married Ramadu's daughter, and they all reached Narnia in the end, and she became a great queen and the mother and grandmother of great kings. The other is that back in your own world, everyone soon started saying how Eustace had improved and how you'd never know him for the same boy. Everyone except Aunt Alberta, who said he had become very commonplace and tiresome, and it must have been the influence of those Pevensie children. And that's the end of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I'll be interested if you can find in that last chapter of John another thing in that book that reminds you of that story in the last chapter. See ya.